Welcome to So What's It Actually About? I'm your host, Margie McKechnie, and I, along with my wide array of guests, hope to help you better understand and weather the wonderful world of actuarial science. Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today we are joined by Soshan. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Standard question. My listeners are probably so sick of this now, but can you position your role as an actuary in the spaces that you are sort of playing in at the moment, just so that our listeners know where our conversation's kind of going to head off?
Okay, lovely. So my main role is as an educator. So I run the Actuarial Science program at UJ. Mm-hmm. And then other parts of my life that I work as an actuary include some board positions. Mm-hmm. So I chair the board of a value-based healthcare company.
Okay.
And I also chair the board of a microinsurer.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so that's involved in burial services and funeral products.
Okay.
That's within the stable of a big company. And then it's hard to distinguish the other parts of my life where I use my actuarial skill set, because I actually feel like it has infiltrated everything.
Yeah.
But I am involved in research and experimentation in the area of experiential learning, which is basically learning by doing and vacation work and things like that. And that's where I'm doing some of my research. And I'm also involved in pure mathematics research. So I'm doing a master's in pure maths at the moment. And then another area that's very linked to the experiential learning is a leadership and coaching kind of interest.
Sure.
And so that's where some of my work is these days as a consultant.
So lots of pots there, and I'm hoping we can speak to all of them. But let's go back to almost like your origin story when it came to actuarial science. And something I always ask all my guests is, why actuarial science? Because I think, you can talk to the spaces you now are in as an actuary, but it has to start with the decision to become an actuary. And so what were your drivers in making that decision?
My main driver was my interest in mathematics. So I didn't know about the actuarial career at all. So I matriculated in 2001. I'd never met an actuary or even heard about the word until I was in matric. And so that was the main thing. I didn't really know what I was getting into, actually. But I knew I loved maths, and I knew I wanted to do something in computation. So I was interested in looking at subjects like computational mathematics and maybe even computer science. So that's where I was really interested. But my parents wanted me to be a doctor.
So then why actuarial science then? I mean, given that you had these other interests and these other things that you kind of like had explored, what sort of honed you in on actuarial science?
So once I became interested, I then started doing some reading. And then I applied for a bursary with Old Mutual. And I got that bursary. And then all of a sudden, the possibility of moving to Cape Town opened up.
Yes.
And then I thought, this is an exciting thing.
Sounds exciting. Sure. And how did you find that studying experience? I mean, given that you went in and I think you had limited knowledge of what actuarial science actually was, what was it like, sort of engaging with these various subjects, and some of them are finance, some of them are stats, some of them are maths. How did you navigate that journey?
I think for me, I enjoyed the process of the diversity in the subjects and the learning process. So I feel like I handled it quite well early on. And then later on in my university career, I failed a subject for the first time in my third year. And that's when I feel like for the first time I was forced to confront this idea of failure. So I had a bit of a smooth ride up until then, and then had to just kind of check myself and do some introspection.
And so then you repeated that subject and then went on to finish your qualification, obviously. But how did you process that failure? What were some of the key things that helped you get through that time?
So, I think it was really, really difficult for me. I think as a student, you then become filled with guilt. I didn't do enough. And in my case, it probably was that I wasn't doing enough, or maybe I wasn't doing enough of the right type of learning.
Got you.
So I've always been somebody who's very interested in conceptual understanding of things. But in an actuarial subject, you have to marry that conceptual understanding with being able to work very fast, being able to work under time pressure.
Yes, that exam technique.
Technique, all of those things. And so I feel like I didn't learn that lesson immediately, and I've learned how to be kind to myself, and that's also okay, because it's figuring out myself in the process.
Yeah.
So I think I handled it. Look, maybe probably didn't fully deal with it at the time. I have a lot, I would say, more developed views of failure after that. As you grow and mature, I think, or for me, I started to appreciate that failure is learning. Finding things difficult does mean I'm pushing myself and growing. So at the time, I think it was very difficult. I don't think, I feel like I didn't really have the right tools, actually. So even though I succeeded, I feel like something like therapy or something at the time would have been a much more responsible and holistic way of handling things.
I think, just to sort of unpack that, how does that then influence the way that you approach students? You're an educator, so you must be dealing with students who fail. How do you approach students in that space now as being sort of like the authority figure?
Yeah, so it's such a lovely question, because I've been thinking about that a lot as to what my philosophy is. I think there are a couple of elements for me. The one is, over and above everything else, we are human beings, and we connect with each other. And we didn't always have that relationship with all our lecturers. And for me, that's really started in my honors year, where we had this amazing lecturer come in, and she was this person that all of a sudden we were connecting to. And I felt the level of growth and learning just elevate so much because of that relationship. So I focus a lot on my relationship with the students and their relationship with us as faculty and with their peers. So that, I think, is the most important aspect that I emphasize, that we learn from each other, we can help each other, and there are ways we can treat each other that enable all of our collective intelligence to increase and our collective quality of thinking to increase. And that's, I think, the thing I focus on the most. And then another thing would be this idea of failure. So I really try to emphasize a lot to students that the way to learn actuarial science is actually to get stuff wrong.
Agreed.
So I often use like an analogy of maybe trying to learn to play the piano by watching somebody else play, and versus actually hitting their own things. So I kind of always tell my students that you've got to put your own tools in your toolbox, and the only way you're going to build those tools is by getting stuff wrong. And then a kind of third emphasis, I would say, in actuarial science is, to get stuff wrong, you have to be writing stuff down. And so I do emphasize that component of kind of reading and writing as a very big aspect of the learning.
Got you. I think I would love to unpack that more, but before we get there, let's sort of talk to your qualification journey. So having finished at UCT, where did you move into? You said you had a bursary at Old Mutual. So did you start working at Old Mutual? And then sort of how did your career path develop from there?
Okay, great. Yes, so I finished my honors at UCT in 2005, and then I started working full-time in 2006.
Okay.
And then in terms of the work career, I started off in product development, savings and investment products, had a lovely time in product development, so kind of never left. And then worked at different parts of Old Mutual. And then I moved out of product and ran Old Mutual's cell captive division for a few years before I moved to London and worked at the time, the company's head office there.
Can I stop you there? For our listeners, what is a cell captive?
So a cell captive is a special type of insurance company where you could almost think about it as you can rent out another insurance company's insurance license.
Yeah.
So the cell captive is actually an insurer that has a license, and then you might be a different type of business that has access to a customer base, or you want to insure yourself, and then you would use the cell captive insurer's license to do your business. And the reason it's called a cell captive is because you kind of divide the insurer into little cells.
Yes,
and each cell is like its own little insurance operation. But you, as the client of the cell captive, you don't have to worry about running the whole insurance company and meeting solvency requirements.
Yes. So it's like an efficiency kind of structure. So, sorry, you were back in the UK.
So then I moved back to South Africa after spending about 3 years overseas. And in my time there, I did a lot of partnership building. So in addition to studying my thinking environment work, I'd been exposed to it before I moved to London. So when I was there, I made sure I spent some time with Nancy Klein, who lived in Oxford. So I did a few courses with her. But in terms of the work I was doing, I was developing value propositions. So started focusing a lot on all the African markets we were operating in outside of South Africa. And so then my work took me to microinsurance and collaboration around microinsurance. So then I started building weather index insurance products for smallholder farmers, protecting them against drought.
Amazing.
And then I moved back to South Africa and started working on African businesses, working on the product development. So I was kind of looking after the product strategy type roles.
And then you'll move into academia. What was the decision making around that? Because it is quite a different environment, albeit that you're still involved in corporate, but your primary focus is education now. What sort of sparked that decision in you?
I was doing some postgraduate studies. So along this journey, while I was working, I was doing some. While I was working in Cape Town, I did my Maths 3 at UCT as an occasional student, which is basically UCT's version of kind of doing a subject for non-degree purposes. And then I moved back. When I moved back to South Africa, I continued my postgrad math studies. And that's where I ended up at UJ doing an honors part-time. And then the statistics department is in the same kind of corridor. And I saw a little poster that said, we're offering an actuarial science program. At that time of my career, I'd spent 14 years in corporate, and I was my husband and I were getting ready to adopt a child. We didn't know it was going to be a son at the time, but we were getting ready to adopt a kid. And so I actually had the idea that I wanted to be a stay-at-home dad for a few years. So I was getting ready for a big kind of career
transition.
Change. And then when the academic opportunity came about, because I saw that poster, and I went to them and said, hey, you need an actuary for this. So it kind of all fell into place at the time of my life when I was ready. And I've always had an interest in education. So I come from a family of teachers.
Lovely.
My dad was a maths teacher, And so it felt like it was doing something out of love.
And you've spoken to Nancy Klein. Tell me that emphasis, that interest, how did that come about, and why has that been a space of interest for you?
This is one of my favorite topics to talk about.
I do.
So about 10 years ago, it was actually, just over 10 years ago, I came across this work in a leadership program. And in that course, I was thinking, these guys are so amazing. These ladies were so amazing. They're making me think about my life in such a unique way. And even though there were 15 other people in the room, it felt like every minute of that 3-week leadership program was designed for me. And it got me thinking, like, how are they doing this? How am I getting so much value? And then I understood that it was actually, a large part of it was because they had understood how the brain works, what ignites the human mind,